The howling wind carried Xander Reid's solitary shadow across the plains of Colorado Territory as he rode toward Los Animas one crisp, autumn morning in 1873. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, but Xander was already hours into his day, his weathered face revealing more stories than the 32 years he'd been alive. His reputation for being a loner preceded him in every town from Santa Fe to Denver, but nowhere more so than in Los Animas, where he'd stake his claim on a small ranch just outside town 5 years earlier. "Come on, Dusty," he muttered to his palomino, who snorted in response. "Few more miles and you'll have your feed." Xander's hand unconsciously moved to his saddlebag where his breakfast sat carefully wrapped in waxed paper, a thick slice of sourdough bread, a hunk of salted beef, and an apple he'd been saving for 3 days. Food was sacred to Xander. Growing up with 5 siblings, and never enough to go around, had taught him early that a man's meals were his own business, and sharing only led to going hungry. The town of Los Animas emerged from the morning mist as Xander approached. Though still small, it had grown considerably since he'd first arrived, with the railroad bringing new faces almost weekly. He disliked the changes but appreciated the ready market for his cattle. Today was supply day, a monthly necessity he treated with the same efficiency as branding calves or mending fences. He hitched Dusty outside Potter's general store, nodding curtly to Mr. Potter himself, who was sweeping the wooden boardwalk. "Morning, Reid," Potter called. "Early as usual." "Potter," Xander acknowledged, pushing through the door. The familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco greeted him as he pulled his list from his pocket. The store was empty save for a woman standing at the counter, speaking animatedly to Mrs. Potter. Xander noted her immediately new faces always caught his attention, but he kept his distance, moving toward the dry goods. She wore a simple but well-made blue traveling dress, her honey brown hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. She wasn't from around here, her clothes were too new, her posture too straight. "I simply don't understand," the woman was saying, her voice carrying a hint of Eastern refinement. "The stage driver assured me we'd stop for a meal, but we arrived so late last night, and the boarding house only had coffee this morning." "I'm sorry, Miss Lambert," Mrs. Potter replied. "The stagecoach schedule's been unpredictable since they changed drivers. The cafe doesn't open for another hour." The woman Miss Lambert sighed, glancing at the clock. "I meant to meet my uncle at 9. I had hoped to get something to eat before then." Xander gathered his supplies, pretending not to listen, though his ears picked up every word. He placed his items on the counter, keeping distance between himself and the stranger. "Morning, Mr. Reid," Mrs. Potter smiled. "Will that be all today?" "Coffee beans," he added gruffly. £2. As Mrs. Potter turned to scoop the beans, the woman beside him looked his way. Their eyes met briefly, hers a startling shade of green that reminded Xander of spring grass after the snow melt. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer now that it was directed at him. "You wouldn't happen to know if there's anywhere else in town to get a bite to eat this early?" Xander shifted uncomfortably. "No, madam," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "I see." She smiled politely before turning back to Mrs. Potter. "I suppose I'll just have to wait." Mrs. Potter finished weighing the coffee beans. "That'll be $3.42, Mr. Reid." Xander counted out the money, aware of the woman's presence beside him. He gathered his supplies into his saddlebags, nodded to Mrs. Potter, and headed for the door. Outside, the morning air was still cool, but the sun had finally broken over the horizon, painting the town in golden light. Xander secured his supplies to Dusty's saddle, then reached for his food. His stomach growled as he unwrapped the bread and beef, reminding him he'd been up since 4. He was about to take his first bite when the store door opened behind him and the woman Miss Lambert emerged. She looked both ways down the street, then checked her pocket watch with a frown. Clearly, she was trying to figure out how to pass the time until either the cafe opened or her meeting began. Xander watched her from beneath the brim of his hat. She was pretty, he admitted to himself in a refined sort of way. Her high cheekbones and gracefully arched eyebrows gave her an almost regal appearance, despite the travel weariness evident in her posture. Something unfamiliar stirred in him. Before he could reconsider, Xander cleared his throat. "Miss," she turned, surprise registering on her face when she saw him. "I've got extra," he said, holding out half of his bread and beef. The words felt foreign in his mouth. In all his adult life, Xander Reid had never not once offered to share his food with a stranger. The woman's eyes widened slightly, then her face transformed with a smile so genuine it made Xander's chest tighten. "That's extraordinarily kind of you, Mr. Reid, Xander Reid." "Emma Lambert," she replied, stepping closer and accepting his offering with slender fingers. "I'm extremely grateful, Mr. Reid, truly." Their fingers brushed momentarily and Xander pulled his hand away as if burned. He nodded, suddenly finding words difficult to come by. "It's delicious," she said after taking a delicate bite. "Did you make the bread yourself?" Xander shook his head. "Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house makes it fresh twice weekly." "You have a talent for finding good food then," Emma said, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. Xander felt the unfamiliar pull of his own lips forming a half-smile in return. A man's got to eat. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, Xander keenly aware that this was the longest conversation he'd had in weeks with anyone who wasn't selling him something or buying his cattle. "You're new to Las Animas," he said finally, a statement rather than a question. Emma nodded. "Just arrived last night. I'm joining my uncle, Dr. Frederick Lambert. Perhaps you know him?" Xander did know of the doctor who'd set up practice 6 months earlier. The man had relocated from Boston, according to town gossip, which Xander generally ignored but occasionally overheard at the saloon. "Seen him around," Xander acknowledged. "Good man from what folks say." "He is," Emma agreed. "After my parents passed last year, he insisted I come west. He thinks the mountain air will be good for my constitution." She blushed slightly. "I apologize, you didn't ask for my life story." "Don't mind," Xander surprised himself by saying. He broke off a piece of his apple and held it out to her. Emma hesitated only briefly before accepting. "You're quite the gentleman, Mr. Reid, sharing your breakfast with a stranger." Xander almost laughed at the description. No one had ever called him a gentleman before. Stubborn, sure. Hard-working occasionally, but never a gentleman. "Not usually," he admitted. "Don't typically share my meals." "Then I'm doubly honored," Emma replied, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him look away. The town was coming to life around them, shopkeepers unlocking doors and setting out wares. Emma finished the last bite of bread and brushed the crumbs from her gloves. "I should probably find my uncle's office," she said. "Thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Reid." Xander nodded, suddenly wishing he had reason to prolong their conversation. "Doctor's office is down the street, 2 buildings past the bank. Can't miss it." Emma smiled again, that same genuine smile that seemed to reach somewhere deep inside him. "Perhaps we'll meet again, Mr. Reid." "Perhaps," he echoed, tipping his hat. He watched as she walked away, her blue skirt swaying slightly with each step. Only when she turned the corner did Xander realize he was still standing there, half-eaten breakfast in hand, feeling strangely lighter than he had in years. Shaking his head at his own foolishness, Xander mounted Dusty and headed toward the feed store. He had work to do, cattle to tend, fences to mend. He didn't have time to think about green eyes and gentle smiles. Yet as he rode through town, he found himself wondering if Dr. Lambert's office had a view of the street, and if Emma might glance out the window as he passed by. 2 weeks passed before Xander returned to Las Animas. The autumn cattle drive had kept him busy, and the changing weather meant preparing his ranch for the coming winter. He told himself he wasn't thinking about Emma Lambert, but each night as he sat alone at his table, eating quietly by lamplight, he remembered the way her face had lit up when he'd offered her his bread. The bank was his first stop in town, depositing money from his cattle sale and settling accounts. As he exited onto the boardwalk, he nearly collided with someone hurrying past. "I beg your pardon," came a familiar voice. Xander looked up to find Emma Lambert steadying herself with a hand on the doorframe. She wore a deep green dress today that matched her eyes, and her hair was arranged more elaborately than before. Recognition dawned on her face. "Mr. Reid, how nice to see you again." "Miss Lambert," he replied, tipping his hat. "You're looking well, thank you." Las Animas agrees with me, it seems. Her cheeks were indeed rosier than he remembered, her eyes brighter. "How have you been? Uncle Frederick mentioned you have a ranch outside of town." "Been busy with the herd," Xander said, wondering how his name had come up in conversation between her and the doctor. "Weather's turning, needed to get the cattle sold before snow." Emma nodded with genuine interest. "I've never experienced a proper winter in the West." "Uncle says I should prepare myself for quite an adventure." "First snow can come any time now," Xander agreed. "Gets cold quick." An awkward silence fell between them. Xander shifted his weight, wondering if he should bid her good day and continue with his errands. But something held him there, unwilling to walk away just yet. "I was just heading to the cafe for lunch," Emma said suddenly. "Would you? That is, if you're not otherwise engaged, would you care to join me? I still owe you for that breakfast." Xander stared at her, surprised by the invitation. People in town didn't typically seek out his company, and he preferred it that way, but the hopeful look in Emma's eyes made refusal impossible. "Could eat," he said simply. Emma's smile was immediate and warm. "Wonderful." They walked side by side down the boardwalk toward Maggie's cafe, Xander acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. He wasn't known for keeping company with anyone, let alone a beautiful woman. Maggie's was busy with the lunchtime crowd, but they found a small table near the back. Xander removed his hat, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. He'd shaved that morning at least, but his clothes were dusty from the ride to town. "I recommend the stew," Emma said, settling into her chair. "It's become my favorite." Xander nodded, grateful for the guidance. When Maggie herself came to take their order, her eyebrows shot up at the sight of Xander sitting across from the doctor's niece. "Well, Mr. Reid, don't often see you in here," Maggie remarked. "What can I get for you folks?" "2 bowls of stew, please," Emma requested. "And some of your corn bread, if you have it." "Coming right up," Maggie replied, giving Xander one more curious look before heading to the kitchen. "You've caused quite a stir," Emma observed with amusement, nodding toward the other patrons who quickly looked away when Xander glanced in their direction. "Not much of a town fixture," he admitted, "so I've gathered. Uncle says you keep to yourself out at your ranch." "That you're quite self-sufficient." Xander's brow furrowed. "Your uncle seems to know a fair bit about me." Emma's cheeks colored slightly. "I may have asked about you," she confessed. "After our first meeting, I was curious about the kind cowboy who shared his breakfast with a hungry stranger." Xander didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that she had thought about him enough to ask questions made something warm unfurl in his chest. "Not that kind," he said gruffly. "Just had extra." Emma's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Of course." Their food arrived, steaming and fragrant. Xander waited for Emma to begin before lifting his own spoon. The stew was indeed good, rich, with chunks of beef and vegetables in a thick broth. "Tell me about your ranch," Emma said between bites. "How long have you been in Las Animas?" 5 years, Xander replied. "Started with 10 acres and 20 head of cattle, now up to 100 acres and 80 head. "That's impressive," Emma said, and Xander could tell she meant it. "You did all that on your own," Xander nodded. "Hire hands for the drives and branding, rest of the time just me." "And before Las Animas," Xander hesitated. He wasn't accustomed to talking about himself. "Drove cattle from Texas, before that fought in the war, before that grew up in Missouri." Emma listened intently, as if his sparse biography was the most fascinating story she'd ever heard. "And your family?" "Parents passed some years back, 4 brothers, 1 sister, all scattered now." Xander surprised himself by adding, "Haven't seen them in 8 years. Something in Emma's expression softened. "I understand. After my parents died, it was just Uncle Frederick and me. Everyone else is back east." Their conversation flowed more easily than Xander could have anticipated. Emma told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's shipping business, and her mother's work with various charities. She spoke of her journey west, the unexpected beauty of the plains and her growing fondness for Las Animas. "Uncle wants me to help at his practice," she explained. "I assisted my father's physician back home sometimes. I have some skill with medicines and basic treatments." "Town could use the help," Xander acknowledged. "Doctor's been overworked since he arrived." Before they knew it, an hour had passed. Xander couldn't remember the last time he'd sat at a table so long, certainly not with company. Emma insisted on paying for their meal, reminding him with a smile that she owed him for the breakfast. "I should let you get back to your errands," she said as they stepped outside. "I've taken up enough of your time." Xander found himself reluctant to part ways. "Still need to visit the feed store," he said, "and pick up some supplies from Potter's." Emma hesitated, then said, "I was planning to stop at Potter's myself. I could accompany you to the feed store first, if you wouldn't mind the company." Xander nodded, surprised by how much he wanted her to join him. They walked side by side down the main street, their shoulders occasionally brushing. At the feed store, Emma showed genuine interest as Xander ordered supplies, asking questions about his horses and cattle that revealed her Eastern upbringing, but also her eagerness to learn. By the time they reached Potter's General Store, Xander had shared more about his ranch and his daily routine than he'd ever told anyone. Emma listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and occasionally sharing observations about her own adjustment to Western life. "I should be getting back," Emma said reluctantly after they'd both made their purchases. "Uncle will be wondering where I've disappeared to." Xander nodded, though he felt an unfamiliar disappointment. "Thank you for lunch," he said formally. Emma smiled. "Thank you for your company." She paused, then added, "Will you be in town again soon?" Xander considered. Usually, he'd stay away for at least another 2 weeks, but the thought of waiting that long to see Emma again was strangely unbearable. "Could be back next week," he said. "Need more nails for the barn roof." Emma's face brightened. "Perhaps we might have lunch again." "I'd like that," Xander admitted. "Friday, same time at Maggie's." Xander nodded. "Friday." As he watched her walk away, Xander felt something he hadn't experienced in years' anticipation. The week ahead suddenly seemed very long indeed. True to his word, Xander returned to Las Animas the following Friday. He'd spent more time than usual preparing for the trip, even going so far as to shave twice that week instead of his usual once. He wore his newest shirt, a deep blue cotton that he'd only worn twice before, and had polished his boots the night before. He arrived at Maggie's cafe 15 minutes early, securing a table by the window. When Emma entered, her face lit up at the sight of him. She wore a rust-colored dress that complemented her honey-brown hair, which was arranged in an intricate braid around her head. "You're early," she smiled, settling across from him. "So are you," he pointed out. "I've been looking forward to today," she admitted candidly. And Xander felt a rush of pleasure at her honesty. Their lunch was even more enjoyable than the first. Emma told him about her week, the patients she'd helped her uncle treat, the women's quilting circle she'd been invited to join, and the letter she'd received from a friend back in Boston. "And you?" she asked. "How was your week at the ranch?" Xander surprised himself by having plenty to share. The fence he'd repaired on the north pasture, the new calf born despite the late season, the wolf tracks he'd spotted near his property. Emma listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she'd been paying attention to everything he'd told her about ranching. After lunch, they walked through town together. Xander was acutely aware of the curious looks they received, but found he didn't mind as much as he'd expected. There was something oddly satisfying about being seen with Emma, as if her presence at his side validated something he hadn't known needed validating. "My uncle is hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening," Emma said as they paused outside the doctor's office. "Just a few people from town, the mayor and his wife, the school teacher, the banker and his family. Would you consider attending as my guest?" Xander hesitated. Social gatherings were something he actively avoided. "Not much for parties," he said honestly. Emma nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across her face. "I understand. I just thought, well, I would enjoy introducing you to my uncle properly." Xander looked at her hopeful expression and found himself reconsidering. "What time?" he heard himself asking. Emma's smile was worth the discomfort he knew he'd feel. 7 o'clock, nothing formal, just dinner and conversation. "I'll be there," Xander promised, already wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The following evening found Xander standing on the doctor's porch, wearing his Sunday suit of dark gray wool that he'd only worn 3 times since purchasing it 2 years earlier. He'd polished his boots again, trimmed his beard, and even purchased a bottle of whiskey from the general store as a gift for the doctor. He knocked on the door, his heart hammering inexplicably. When Emma opened it, the sight of her momentarily robbed him of speech. She wore a gown of deep burgundy silk, more elaborate than anything he'd seen her in before, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in soft curls around her face, with the rest pinned elegantly at the back of her head. "You came," she said, her eyes bright with pleasure. "Said I would," Xander replied, finding his voice at last. "And you look very handsome," she added, causing heat to rise in his face. "You look." Xander searched for a word adequate to describe her. "Beautiful," he finally said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Emma's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "Thank you. Please come in. Everyone's in the sitting room." Xander followed her inside, immediately aware of the elegant furnishings that spoke of Eastern refinement. The doctor had clearly brought a piece of Boston with him to Colorado. Dr. Frederick Lambert was a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s with a neatly trimmed beard threaded with silver. His eyes, the same vivid green as his niece's, regarded Xander with open curiosity. "Mr. Reid," he greeted, extending his hand. "I'm delighted you could join us." "Emma has spoken quite highly of you." Xander shook the doctor's hand firmly. "Dr. Lambert brought this for your hospitality." He offered the whiskey, which the doctor accepted with evident appreciation. "An excellent choice, thank you. Please let me introduce you to our other guests." The introductions passed in a blur. Mayor Wilson and his plump, friendly wife, Miss Harrington, the young schoolteacher, Mr. Brookfield, the banker, along with his wife and 2 grown daughters. All regarded Xander with varying degrees of surprise and curiosity. He was known to them by reputation only the solitary rancher who rarely socialized. Throughout the evening, Xander found himself gravitating toward Emma, who seemed to sense his discomfort and stayed close. She skillfully included him in conversations, highlighting his knowledge of cattle and ranching when the topic turned to the region's economy, and drawing out his experiences during the war when the men discussed politics. During dinner, an elaborate affair with multiple courses that made Xander acutely conscious of his table manners, he was seated beside Emma, with Dr. Lambert on his other side. The doctor, to Xander's surprise, proved to be excellent company, discussing everything from the latest medical journals to his observations about Western wildlife. "Emma tells me you built your ranch from nothing," Dr. Lambert remarked as they enjoyed roast beef and potatoes. "That's admirable, Mr. Reid. Shows character and determination." "Thank you, sir," Xander replied, unused to such direct praise. "Been hard work, but worth it." "I understand completely," the doctor said. "Starting my practice here was similar in many ways. Building something where there was nothing before gives a man purpose." Xander nodded, finding unexpected common ground with the educated Easterner. After dinner, the party moved back to the sitting room for coffee and dessert. Xander found himself in conversation with Miss Harrington about the school's need for new books, a topic he knew little about but found surprisingly interesting as the passionate young teacher detailed her struggles and hopes. Throughout it all, he was aware of Emma moving about the room, the perfect hostess, yet her eyes frequently found his, checking that he was comfortable, sharing private smiles that made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar but not unpleasant way. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Xander realized he'd actually enjoyed himself. The realization was startling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spent an evening in company and not counted the minutes until he could leave. "May I walk you out?" Emma asked as Xander retrieved his hat and coat. They stepped onto the porch, the October night crisp and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust, the moon a perfect crescent above the mountains. "Thank you for coming tonight," Emma said softly. "I know it wasn't easy for you." "Wasn't so bad," Xander admitted. "Your uncle's a good man." "He likes you," Emma replied. "Said you were refreshingly genuine, high praise from him." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the small town at night, a distant piano from the saloon, the occasional whinny of a horse creating a peaceful backdrop. "When will you be in town again?" Emma asked. Xander considered. "Could come in Wednesday. Need to order some lumber for winter repairs." "I'd like to see you," Emma said simply. "Perhaps you might join us for dinner, just you, me, and Uncle Frederick, something less formal than tonight." "I'd like that," Xander replied, surprising himself with how true it was. Emma smiled, then hesitated before stepping closer. "I'm very glad you shared your breakfast with me that day, Mr. Reid." "Xander," he said suddenly. "Could call me Xander if you wanted." Her smile widened. "Xander," she repeated, as if testing the feel of his name on her lips. "Then you must call me Emma." "Emma," he echoed, liking the way it sounded in his own voice. The moment stretched between them, filled with something Xander couldn't quite name but could definitely feel a connection, a possibility, a future not yet written but suddenly imaginable. "Good night, Xander," Emma said softly. "Good night, Emma." As he rode back to his ranch under the star-filled sky, Xander realized that for the first time in years, his solitude felt less like a comfort and more like an absence. And for the first time ever, he was looking forward to returning to town. Wednesday couldn't come soon enough for Xander. He found himself counting the days, then the hours, his usual routine seeming dull and colorless compared to the anticipation of seeing Emma again. The memory of her smile, the sound of his name on her lips, the way her eyes seemed to light from within when they met these thoughts accompanied him through his chores, making even the most tedious tasks bearable. When Wednesday finally arrived, Xander was up before dawn. He bathed in the creek despite the morning chill, shaved with extra care, and put on his second-best shirt, a cream-colored cotton that Emma hadn't seen before. He told himself these efforts were simply about respect for the doctor's hospitality, but he knew better. He arrived in Las Animas by mid-morning, taking care of his lumber order and other business efficiently. At noon, he found himself outside the doctor's office, hesitating before knocking on the door. It opened almost immediately, revealing Emma in a simple blue dress, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Xander, I was hoping you might stop by." Her use of his first name sent an inexplicable warmth through him. "Uncle's just finishing with a patient. Would you like to come in?" The doctor's waiting room was small but tidy, with several chairs and a bookshelf filled with medical texts. From a room beyond came the murmur of voices. "How has your week been?" Emma asked, gesturing for him to sit. "Good," Xander replied, removing his hat. "Got the north fence completely repaired, starting on the barn roof tomorrow." "All that work, just you alone on your ranch," Emma mused. "It must be peaceful but lonely at times." Xander had never thought of his solitude as loneliness before, but looking at Emma now, he recognized the emptiness of his evenings, the silence of his meals for what they truly were. "Gets quiet," he admitted. "Especially winter, I can imagine." Boston winters were always so lively, parties and sleigh rides, concerts and gatherings. Everyone stayed close to keep the cold at bay. Her eyes grew distant with memory. "But I imagine winter here has its own beauty." "Does," Xander agreed. "First big snow makes everything clean, silent. Like the world's holding its breath." Emma's expression softened. "You have a poet's soul, Xander Reid." Before he could deny this unlikely description, the inner door opened, and Dr. Lambert emerged with a young mother and her toddler. "Remember, Mrs. Collins, twice daily until the rash clears," he was saying, "and keep him from scratching if you can." After the patient left, Dr. Lambert turned to Xander with a warm smile. "Mr. Reid, Xander, good to see you. I hope you're joining us for dinner, if the offer still stands," Xander replied. "Absolutely. Emma's been cooking all afternoon. I believe we're having beef stew and fresh bread." The doctor winked at his niece. "She insisted on making it herself, though our housekeeper offered." Emma blushed slightly. "I wanted to try Mrs. Holloway's bread recipe." Xander mentioned it was quite good. I have one more patient to see, Dr. Lambert said, but Emma can show you to the house. I'll be along shortly. The doctor's home was attached to his office by a short hallway. Emma led Xander through to a cozy kitchen filled with delicious aromas. Would you mind terribly if I finish preparing while we talk? Emma asked. The bread should be coming out of the oven soon. Don't mind, Xander replied, strangely content to watch her move about the kitchen. Emma checked the bread in the oven, then stirred the stew bubbling on the stove. She moved with confident efficiency, clearly at home in the domestic space. I learned to cook from our housekeeper in Boston, she explained, noticing his observation. Mother thought it improper for a lady of our standing, but I found it satisfying. There's something honest about creating a meal with your own hands. Know what you mean, Xander said. Feel the same about building things. Fence post might not look like much, but knowing you set it right, that it'll hold through winter storms, means something? Emma smiled over her shoulder. Exactly, creating something solid and real. She pulled the bread from the oven, its golden crust making Xander's mouth water. Would you set the table? Plates are in that cupboard. There was something strangely intimate about helping Emma prepare for dinner, moving around the kitchen together, anticipating each other's movements. By the time Dr. Lambert joined them, the table was set, the stew was ladled into bowls, and the bread was sliced and steaming. Dinner was a relaxed affair, far more comfortable than the formal gathering had been. Dr. Lambert shared stories about his patients respecting their privacy, but describing unusual ailments or amusing misunderstandings. Emma talked about her growing involvement with the town's school, where she'd begun helping Miss Harrington with the younger children. Xander found himself contributing more than he expected, describing the challenges of ranching in the region, the behavior of cattle during different seasons, even a few tales from his cattle driving days that made Emma laugh and the doctor nod appreciatively. You have a real understanding of the land, Dr. Lambert observed, and of animals. That's a valuable knowledge, especially out here. Just experience, Xander demurred, though he appreciated the recognition. Experience is the best teacher, the doctor replied. Medical school taught me the science of healing, but it's the years of practice that taught me to truly understand illness and recovery. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where Dr. Lambert poured small glasses of brandy for himself and Xander. The conversation continued easily, touching on books. Xander admitted to having a small collection of novels he read during winter evenings. Music, Emma confessed to missing piano concerts and the changes coming to the West with the expanding railroads. Progress is inevitable, Doctor. Lambert mused, but I do worry about what's lost in the rush toward civilization, as they call it. Been thinking the same, Xander admitted. More people coming every year, land getting parceled smaller, not all bad, but changes things. Will it affect your ranch? Emma asked, concern in her voice. Xander shook his head. Got enough acres to manage. Railroad's good for business, actually. Easier to get cattle to market. The evening passed quickly, and before Xander knew it, the mantel clock was chiming 9. He stood reluctantly, knowing he had a ride ahead of him. This was a pleasure, Dr. Lambert said, shaking Xander's hand warmly. You must join us again soon. Thank you for the invitation, Xander replied, meaning it sincerely. Dinner was excellent. I'll walk you out, Emma offered, following him to the door. On the porch, the night air was cold enough to see their breath. Emma had grabbed a shawl, which she pulled tightly around her shoulders. Thank you for coming, she said. I've enjoyed every minute. Me too, Xander admitted. Your uncle's good company. And me? Emma asked with a playful smile. Am I good company too? Xander felt a smile tugging at his lips. The best I've had in years. Her eyes softened at his honesty. I feel the same. When I first came to Los Animas, I was terribly homesick. I missed Boston, my friends, everything familiar, but lately... She paused. Lately I've been thinking this place might become home after all. Something in her voice, in her eyes as they held his, made Xander's heart beat faster. On impulse, he reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. Glad to hear that, he said softly. Emma looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "Would you like to join us for Sunday dinner as well, after church? Don't typically attend services," Xander admitted. "Then just for dinner," Emma suggested. "Uncle's been invited to the mayor's after church, but he should be back by 2. Xander nodded. "I'll be here." Emma squeezed his hand before letting go. "Safe ride home, Xander." As he mounted his horse and turned toward his ranch, Xander realized he was already counting the days until Sunday. The pattern continued through November and into December. Xander found reasons to come to town twice a week, sometimes more. He joined Emma and her uncle for dinner regularly, occasionally accompanied them to town events, and even attended the Thanksgiving celebration at the mayor's home as Emma's guest. With each meeting, each conversation, each shared meal, the connection between them deepened. Xander found himself opening up in ways he never had before, telling Emma about his childhood in Missouri, his complicated relationship with his brothers, the nightmares that sometimes still plagued him from his war years. In turn, she shared her fears and hopes, her grief over her parents' deaths, her initial reluctance to come west, and her growing affection for Los Animas. Winter arrived with the first heavy snowfall in mid-December. Xander had just finished his morning chores when he saw a rider approaching through the swirling white. He recognized the doctor's bay gelding and hurried to meet him at the gate. "Dr. Lambert," he called over the wind. "Something wrong?" The doctor, bundled against the cold, dismounted stiffly. "Nothing wrong, my boy, just delivering an invitation." He stamped his feet to restore circulation. "Though I'd welcome a hot coffee before heading back." Inside Xander's modest cabin, the doctor warmed himself by the fire while Xander prepared coffee. The home was simple but neat, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and 2 small bedrooms beyond. "Emma wanted to deliver this herself," Dr. Lambert said, pulling an envelope from his coat, "but I insisted the weather was too harsh. The women of the town are organizing a Christmas gathering at the church on the 23rd. Dinner, music, the usual festivities." Xander accepted the envelope, which contained a handwritten invitation in Emma's elegant script. "Thank you for bringing this." "There's more," the doctor said, accepting the mug of coffee Xander offered. "Emma and I would like to invite you to spend Christmas Day with us, just a quiet dinner, some small gifts perhaps." Xander was momentarily speechless. He hadn't celebrated Christmas properly since leaving home at 17. The holidays were usually just another day on the ranch for him. "Don't need to answer right away," Dr. Lambert added, seeing his hesitation, "but I know it would mean a great deal to Emma." "I'd be honored," Xander said, finding his voice. "Never been much for celebrating, but I'd like to join you." The doctor smiled warmly. "Excellent, Emma will be delighted." He sipped his coffee, looking around the cabin with interest. "You've built a good life here, Xander, solid, respectable." "Trying to," Xander acknowledged. Dr. Lambert set down his mug, his expression growing more serious. "I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I feel I should speak plainly. I've noticed the growing attachment between you and my niece." Xander tensed, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "Emma is very dear to me," the doctor continued. "Her happiness is my primary concern, and I've not seen her as happy as she's been these past months since her parents were alive." "Sir," Dr. Lambert held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I've watched you together. I've seen the way you look at her when you think no one is observing and the way she brightens when you enter a room. I'm not blind, nor am I opposed." Xander's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're a good man, Xander Reid. Hardworking, honest, respectful. You may not have the education or background that Emma's parents might have expected in a suitor, but you have qualities far more important: integrity, courage, and a genuine heart." "Thank you, sir," Xander said quietly, deeply moved by the doctor's words. "I only ask that you be certain of your feelings before you speak of them to Emma. She's experienced enough loss in her young life. I wouldn't wish to see her heart broken." "I'd never intentionally hurt her," Xander said firmly. "I believe that," Dr. Lambert replied. "Just be sure of what you want. A life together would mean changes for you both." The doctor finished his coffee and stood to leave. Think about what I've said, and know that whatever develops between you and Emma has my blessing should you seek it, after Dr. Lambert departed. Xander sat by the fire for a long time, turning the doctor's words over in his mind. He'd known for weeks that his feelings for Emma had grown beyond friendship, but he'd been hesitant to put a name to them, afraid of the changes they might require. Now, faced with the doctor's tacit approval, Xander was forced to examine his heart honestly. He thought of Emma's smile, her laughter, the way she listened when he spoke as if every word mattered. He thought of how empty his cabin felt now compared to the warmth of her presence, how the idea of returning to his solitary existence before he met her seemed unbearable. With sudden clarity, Xander realized he was in love with Emma Lambert. The recognition was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had no idea if she felt the same, though the doctor's words suggested she might. And even if she did, Xander wasn't sure what a future together would look like. His ranch was remote, his lifestyle simple and demanding. Would a woman raised in Boston society be happy here? These questions swirled in his mind as he attended to his afternoon chores. By evening, Xander had reached a decision. He would attend the Christmas gathering and spend the holiday with Emma and her uncle. And sometime during those days, if the moment seemed right, he would speak to Emma about his feelings. The Christmas gathering at the church was more elaborate than Xander had anticipated. The simple building was transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. Nearly everyone in Los Animas had turned out, dressed in their finest clothes, bearing dishes for the communal dinner. Xander arrived early, feeling awkward in his Sunday suit but determined to make an effort. He spotted Emma immediately, helping arrange tables with several other women. She wore a gown of deep green velvet that complemented her coloring perfectly, her hair adorned with a small sprig of holly. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. She excused herself from her tasks and hurried to greet him. "Xander, you came." She took his hands in hers, her eyes sparkling. "I was beginning to worry the snow might keep you away." "Would take more than snow to keep me from seeing you," he replied honestly, rewarded by the blush that rose in her cheeks. The evening proved more enjoyable than Xander had expected. The food was plentiful and delicious, with Emma's bread receiving particular praise. The schoolchildren performed Christmas carols, accompanied by Miss Harrington on the small church organ. Gifts were exchanged, mostly simple handmade items that reflected the frontier spirit of making do with available resources. Throughout it all, Xander stayed close to Emma, helping where needed, engaging in conversations with townspeople who had finally begun to accept his presence, and occasionally catching her eye across the room to share a private smile. As the gathering wound down and families began to depart, Emma found Xander helping stack chairs. "Would you walk me home?" she asked. "Uncle's staying to help Reverend Thomas with some church business." The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky above. They walked slowly, their breath clouding in the frosty air, a comfortable silence between them. "I have something for you," Emma said suddenly, stopping beneath the bare branches of an oak tree. "A Christmas gift. I was going to wait until Christmas Day, but—" She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. Xander accepted it, surprised and touched. "Didn't expect. I have something for you too, but it's at the ranch." "Open it," she urged, her eyes bright with anticipation. Carefully, Xander unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully crafted leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with his initials XR in elegant script. "I noticed you keep notes about your cattle and the weather in those small notebooks," Emma explained. "I thought you might like something more permanent, something that would last." Xander ran his fingers over the smooth leather, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Thank you, Emma," she smiled, clearly pleased by his reaction. "You're welcome." They continued walking, the journal tucked safely inside Xander's coat. When they reached the doctor's house, Emma invited him in for hot chocolate, but Xander declined, knowing the late hour and the ride that awaited him. "I'll see you Christmas Day," he promised. Emma nodded, then hesitated on the porch step, bringing her face nearly level with his. "I'm looking forward to it," she said softly. Something in her voice, in the way she looked at him in the moonlight, gave Xander courage. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief and tender, a question rather than a demand. When Xander pulled back, Emma's eyes remained closed for a moment, her lips slightly parted. Then she looked at him, her expression a mixture of wonder and joy. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Xander," she replied, her voice equally soft. As he rode home through the star-filled night, Xander's heart was lighter than it had been in years. The memory of Emma's lips on his, the look in her eyes afterward, filled him with a hope he'd long thought beyond his reach. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow sparkling in the morning light. Xander had been up since before dawn, tending to his livestock and preparing the gifts he'd carefully selected for Emma and her uncle. For Dr. Lambert, he'd crafted a wooden medicine box with multiple compartments and a carrying handle designed to make house calls easier. For Emma, he'd commissioned a silver pendant from the jeweler in Denver during his last cattle sale, a small star surrounded by delicate filigree work that had reminded him of the night sky above Los Animas when they'd first kissed. The items were wrapped in plain paper and tied with strings. Xander had no skill for fancy presentation, but he hoped the thought behind them would matter more than their appearance. He arrived at the doctor's home promptly at noon, as invited. Emma opened the door, radiant in a deep red dress with white lace at the collar. The smile that lit her face at the sight of him warmed Xander more effectively than any fire could have. "Merry Christmas," she greeted him, taking his hands and drawing him inside. "I'm so glad you're here." The house was decorated with evergreen boughs, candles, and red ribbons. A small tree stood in the corner of the sitting room, adorned with paper ornaments and strings of cranberries. The air was filled with the aroma of roasting turkey and spices. Dr. Lambert emerged from his study, looking festive in a burgundy waistcoat. "Xander, welcome. Merry Christmas, my boy." The day passed in a warm blur of delicious food, cheerful conversation, and genuine affection. They exchanged gifts after dinner, with both Lamberts expressing delight at Xander's offerings. "This is exquisite," Emma breathed, touching the silver pendant reverently. "Did you have it made specially?" Xander nodded, pleased by her reaction. "Reminded me of the stars above Los Animas." Emma immediately asked him to help her put it on, turning so he could fasten the clasp at the nape of her neck. The simple act of his fingers brushing against her skin sent warmth through them both. "It's perfect," she said, her hand going to the pendant where it rested just below her throat. "I'll treasure it always." Dr. Lambert, equally impressed with his medicine box, insisted on showing Xander the gift. Emma had given him a new stethoscope ordered from Philadelphia, while Emma disappeared into the kitchen to prepare coffee and dessert. When she returned, the three of them settled by the fire with apple pie and coffee, sharing stories and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the holiday. As evening approached, Dr. Lambert excused himself to check on a patient who was expecting a baby any day. "Don't get up," he insisted when Xander began to rise. "Enjoy your coffee, I won't be long." Left alone, Xander and Emma sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the fire dance in the hearth. "This has been the most wonderful Christmas I can remember," Emma said softly. "Thank you for being part of it." Xander looked at her, illuminated by firelight, the silver pendant gleaming at her throat, and knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend every Christmas for the rest of his life with her. "Emma," he began, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. "Need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," Xander took a deep breath. Words had never come easily to him, but these needed to be said. "Never expected to find someone like you, never thought I'd want to, been alone so long, got used to it. Thought that was all there was for me." Emma listened intently, her expression encouraging him to continue. "Then you came along, forgot your breakfast that day." A smile tugged at his lips at the memory. "Something made me share mine, best decision I ever made." He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. These past months, getting to know you, spending time with you, changed everything, way I see myself, way I see my future. Emma's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. What I'm trying to say is, I love you, Emma Lambert. Never said those words to anyone before. Wasn't sure I knew how to feel it even, but I do. Love you more than I thought possible. A tear spilled down Emma's cheek. Oh, Xander, she whispered. I love you too. I think I've known it since that day you first shared your bread with me. Xander brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Don't have much to offer, just a small ranch, simple life, but everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it. Emma freed her hand to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Xander Reid? He nodded, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. Asking if you'd consider being my wife, building a life together. Yes, Emma said without hesitation, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you, Xander. Joy unlike anything he'd ever experienced surged through him. Xander pulled Emma into his arms, capturing her lips in a kiss that expressed everything words couldn't: his love, his gratitude, his promise to cherish her always. When they finally parted, Emma's eyes were shining with happiness. I never expected to find love in Los Animas, she confessed. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else with anyone else. Your uncle, Xander began, suddenly remembering, already approves, Emma assured him. He told me so just last week, said he's never seen me happier than when I'm with you. The front door opened, bringing a gust of cold air as Dr. Lambert returned, stamping snow from his boots. He took one look at their radiant faces and smiled knowingly. I see congratulations are in order, he said, crossing to shake Xander's hand firmly. I couldn't ask for a better man for my niece. Thank you, sir, Xander replied earnestly. I'll do everything in my power to make her happy. Of that I have no doubt, the doctor replied, embracing his niece warmly. And please, it's Frederick now, we're family. They spent the evening planning their future together. Emma would continue helping her uncle until the wedding, then divide her time between the ranch and town as needed. The ranch house would need expansion, another bedroom perhaps, and a larger kitchen. They would marry in the spring, when the winter snows had melted and travel was easier for any guests they might invite. As the evening drew to a close and Xander prepared to leave, Emma walked with him to the porch. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in patterns they both now recognized. Will you come for New Year's dinner? Emma asked, her arms around his waist, her head resting against his chest. Uncle wants to announce our engagement formally then. Wouldn't miss it, Xander promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As he rode home through the snowy landscape, Xander marveled at how completely his life had changed in just a few months. The solitude that had once been his refuge now seemed empty compared to the warmth of Emma's presence. The future that had once stretched before him, predictable and solitary, now held possibilities he'd never dared imagine: a wife to share his days, perhaps children to inherit the ranch he'd built, a family to give purpose to his work. All because a woman had forgotten her breakfast, and for the first time in his life, Xander Reid had decided to share his meal. Spring came early to Los Animas in 1874. By late March, the snow had melted from all but the shadowed places, and the first green shoots were emerging from the softening earth. On the first Saturday in April, with the fruit trees beginning to blossom and meadowlarks singing in the fields, Emma Lambert became Emma Reid in a simple ceremony at the town church. The bride wore a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to her mother, carefully altered by Mrs. Potter and the ladies of the quilting circle. Her bouquet was made of wildflowers gathered that morning by the schoolchildren, tied with a ribbon that matched the blue of the Colorado sky. And around her neck gleamed the silver star pendant, a constant reminder of the night she and Xander had first acknowledged their love. Xander, uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit ordered from Denver, stood tall beside Dr. Lambert until the moment Emma appeared at the church door. The sight of her, radiant with happiness and walking toward him on her uncle's arm, nearly brought him to his knees with gratitude and love. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, exchanged in voices that carried clearly through the packed church. Nearly everyone in Las Animas had turned out for the wedding, along with ranchers from the surrounding area and even a few guests from as far away as Denver, evidence of how deeply the couple had become integrated into the community. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes. There was music from a hastily assembled band, dancing that continued well into the evening, and enough good wishes to last the newlyweds a lifetime. As sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and pink, Xander and Emma slipped away, boarding the decorated wagon that would take them to their ranch, their home. The expanded cabin gleamed with fresh paint, the new addition doubling its size to accommodate their life together. Inside, Emma had already begun transforming the bachelor's quarters into a proper home, with curtains at the windows, colorful quilts on the beds, and books lining the shelves Xander had built. That night, as stars appeared above their land, Xander Reid held his wife in his arms and thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to Las Animas that autumn morning, hungry and without her breakfast. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. Emma's smile in the lamplight was answer enough, but she spoke the words he would never tire of hearing. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. I love you, Xander Reid, and I love you, Emma Reid," he replied, still marveling at how natural those words had become. "Always will." Over the years that followed, the Reid Ranch prospered and grew. Xander's knowledge of cattle and land management, combined with Emma's education and business acumen, proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and became known throughout Colorado territory for the quality of their operation. Emma continued to assist her uncle one day each week, maintaining her connection to the town and keeping her medical skills sharp. She also taught reading and arithmetic to the children of neighboring ranches once a week, hosting them in the front room of the expanded ranch house. In the spring of 1875, their first child was born, a sturdy boy they named Frederick Xander Reid, after his grandfather and father. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Emma, with her mother's honey-brown hair and her father's quiet strength. In 1880, their family was completed with the arrival of another son, William Thomas, born during the worst blizzard Las Animas had seen in a decade. Through it all, the joys and challenges of building a ranch, raising children, and growing older together, Xander and Emma Reid maintained the connection that had begun over a shared breakfast on a cool autumn morning. Their love deepened with each passing year, weathering the harsh realities of frontier life and celebrating its unique rewards. Dr. Lambert remained a beloved figure in their lives, eventually retiring from his practice to live in a small cabin Xander built near the main house. There, he enjoyed his grandchildren, wrote his memoirs, and provided medical advice to the growing community of ranchers and farmers who had settled in the area. Las Animas itself grew and changed with the times. The railroad brought more settlers, more businesses, more connections to the wider world. But the Reid Ranch remained a constant, a testament to what could be built with hard work, determination, and love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, with their children grown and the ranch flourishing, Xander and Emma sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the familiar landscape in gold. Their hands were clasped, fingers intertwined with the ease of long practice. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd remembered my breakfast that day?" Emma asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. Xander considered the question. "Reckon I'd still have noticed you," he said finally. "Might have taken longer to speak to you, though." Emma smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes evidence of a life filled with both sunshine and weather. "Thank goodness for empty stomachs and generous cowboys, then. Thank goodness for women who forget their meals," Xander replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. As darkness fell and stars emerged above the land they'd nurtured together, Xander Reid reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him here. From a solitary existence to a life rich with love, family, and purpose, all because one morning, against his nature and all his habits, he had offered to share his breakfast with a hungry stranger. It had been the first meal he'd ever shared. But in the years since, Xander had learned that some things like love, like happiness, like the quiet joy of a life well lived only grew more abundant with sharing. And not once in all those years had Xander Reid regretted that first, simple offer of bread and beef on a cool autumn morning in Los Animas.